have the right to take life into our hands? Should the right to live include the right to die with dignity? This is an existential question. When we go through the various religious views on euthanasia, almost all religions teach us that it is still immoral to embark on any course of action whose aim is to destroy human life. Irrespective of the quality of the individual's motive, as it is a crime against life and a crime against God, they believe that all human life is sacred because it is given by God, and that God chooses how long each person lives. Human beings should not interfere in this. Mercy killing or euthanasia is another kind of murder for convenience. It involves including the death of terminally ill people by administering fatal drugs or by withdrawing life-supporting medical aid.
What is our society becoming? It's a quality society. Only the best will survive.
The word euthanasia in Greek means good death. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, euthanasia is the practice of killing or permitting the death of hopelessly sick or injured individuals for reasons of mercy.
Euthanasia means death and eu means good. So, putting together two words, we get good death. It advocates causing painless death to a person suffering from hopeless and incurable painful disease. Euthanasia often appears disguised as an action of mercy and kindness in order to provide a dignified death to loved ones.
On va devenir de plus en plus vulnérables.
We will become more and more vulnerable as a result of the legalization of euthanasia. Certain people believed that any suffering that could not be cured should result in killing someone in order to relieve them of their suffering, which is completely false because no beautiful words, no precise act like this, even if it is spectacular, will ever make suffering disappear.
Spectaculaires ne vont faire disparaître la souffrance.
What is our society becoming? It's a quality society. Only the best will survive.
Mercy killing has a great potential for misuse because it can be regarded as a convenient solution when caring for the aged parents or relatives becomes a burden. Caring for our loved ones in their old age and illness is our responsibility and privilege. When we analyze abortion versus euthanasia, abortion is putting a baby to death, whereas euthanasia is putting an old person or a person confined to bed to death. The rationale that the proponents of euthanasia says behind such choice is that when someone aborts a child, they say that they don't want the child because there is a deformity or maybe it is inconvenient to have a child, and likewise in euthanasia the sick person is seen as a burden to the society, so they decide to pull the plug and move the person away from the society. In case of age, one who is aborted is too young, and in the case of euthanasia, usually they are too old. Therefore, the age becomes the rationale for choosing so. Intelligence also becomes rationale in case of abortion. They say the child is not yet conscious. And in the case of euthanasia, they will say the person who is too old is no longer conscious. With regard to the place of residence, in the case of abortion, it is done in the womb of the mother, and in the case of euthanasia, it may be done at home or in a nursing home or in a hospital. The rationale behind the meaningfulness of life in abortion is that they say that the fetus does not yet have a meaningful life. And in the case of euthanasia, the elderly person no longer feels meaningfulness of his or her life. The real problem to be confronted in the growing social acceptance of euthanasia seems to be elsewhere. As has already been seen in the case of abortion, the moral condemnation of euthanasia goes unheard by and is incomprehensible to those who are imbued, perhaps unconsciously, with the conception of life that is irreconcilable with the very dignity of the human person, correctly understood. To find proof of this, it is sufficient to consider some of the negative characteristics in work in the culture that abstracts from the transcendent. The habit of disposing of human life at its source. The tendency of appreciating personal life only to the degree that it can provide riches and pleasure. Regarding material well-being and pleasure as supreme good, and thus viewing suffering as an absolute evil to be avoided at all costs and by every means. Viewing death as an absurd end to a life that could have given further pleasure, or as liberation from a life deprived of meaning because it was destined for further suffering. With God out of picture, it follows that one is responsible solely to oneself and the freely established laws of society. Paradoxically, where these attitudes have taken root among persons and social groups, it can appear logical and humane to gently put an end to one's or another's life when that life holds only suffering and serious impairment. But in reality, this is absurd and inhuman. Euthanasia is a grave violation of law of God, since it is the deliberate and morally unacceptable killing of a human person.
In our daily lives, we live in superficiality. And I think that for me, it is important to learn how to love. And the best way to learn how to love is to not be afraid to face the difficulty of our humanity. To say there is someone with me and we will get through this together. Joy comes from the discovery that this is true.
Du fait que c'est vrai.
The word mercy, if you trace it back, it means in Latin to be with. We do not get our value by what we can do.
A practitioner of medicine cannot be both healer and a killer, said Surgeon General C. Everett Koop, as it would go against the medical ethos. From a medical perspective, the duty of medical science and doctors is to help the living and is not for them to enter the realm of death.
Hello there, I'm Dr. Purnendu Roy. I'm a surgeon from Genesis Hospital. I remembered a day which caused a lot of emotional disturbance for me when I was the first year student. I was one of the fresh students in surgery in JIPMA, and one lady used to come on a regular basis for treatment for cancer breast chemotherapy. And every month she will come and get her chemotherapy and go back. And she had kind of developed a kind of trust in me. So whenever she will get admitted, she will always say, Dr. Purnendu Roy ka koopudinga, avanukku idu venum. Now the thing is, each time I gave the chemotherapy, and in front of my eyes she was gradually deteriorating. On the 5th cycle when she came, she had multiple metastases in her lung and also deposits in her spine. She was in agonizing pain and also she was breathless and couldn't lie down. She would just sit whole night with a pillow and support. It was very difficult to watch for me as a young budding surgeon. When I took my chemotherapy injections to give it to her, she held my hand like this and she said, "Doc, you also know, I also know that I will not recover from this. Why are you doing this? Why do you want me to suffer for such a long time? I won't tell anybody. It's only between you and me. If you ever feel my pain, don't give the chemotherapy. Just push potassium. Let me just die peacefully." I didn't have words. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't even look into her eyes. But she wouldn't let my hand take away. So I was kind of stuck in that situation. Then she looked into my eyes and said, "Tell me honestly something. If it was your sister, would you have allowed her to suffer like this? Night after night in agony and pain and breathlessness like this?" I didn't know what to do. I ran away from there. I applied for 2 days leave. Didn't want to see the lady again.
The Hippocratic Oath, a document which, for the most part, is still understood by mainstream society as the basis on which healthcare is founded. I will use treatment to help the sick according to my ability and judgment, but never with a view to injury and wrongdoing. Neither will I administer a poison to anybody when asked to do so, nor will I suggest such a course. But since the year 2000, we've seen a radical shift in Western civilization's understanding of compassionate care. What has triggered this massive cultural shift from caring to killing?
We've had a protection against physicians killing people for more than 2,000 years because of the Hippocratic tradition. And we have now arrived at a moment in history when we've opened Pandora's box, and the inevitable danger is that physicians become a threat to their patients.
We are able to control virtually all pain if properly dealt with. We need to improve end-of-life training, pain management care in our medical schools, in our nursing programs across the country. We can offer complete relief.
Such an approach demonstrates great respect for the patient. With this support, we address their emotional, physical, spiritual, social well-being so that they don't feel abandoned, they don't feel as if they need to ask for someone to end their life.
Euthanasia, sometimes called mercy killing, can be a difficult issue. On the one hand, we do not want to take a person's life into our hands and end it prematurely. On the other hand, we don't want to prolong the suffering of the terminally ill person and the process of dying more than necessary. That is, we want to preserve life, but we don't want to prolong death.
Once that you will admit that a doctor can kill his patient, even if it is in terminally situations, in terminal conditions, it will be very difficult to put a red line and to say you cannot go beyond this, because what is a terminally ill situation? How can you judge if a patient will still live 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months?
Life is a sacred gift of God. God is the giver of life and He has power and dominion over life. And we cannot take it. And therefore, no one has the power over the date of his death. God has the final say over death. Those who promote euthanasia are trying to snatch that power from God. The fundamental and underlying understanding regarding euthanasia is just the ideal that we are all gods and we have the power over our life. Those who promote euthanasia has the idea that they are intelligent than God, that they can end the sufferings of someone by playing God. They hold on to the idea that they have control over life and death and that they have control over how we craft our life. We cannot make ourselves our own gods. We have to be subservient to God. Death is a natural occurrence. Sometimes God allows a person to suffer much before his death, and sometimes a person's suffering is short. No one enjoys suffering, but that does not allow us to take the right to cut short one's life. Often God's purposes are made known through suffering. Only God knows what is best, and His timing, even in the matter of death, is perfect. We should never seek to prematurely end our life, but neither must we go to the extent of using extraordinary means to preserve our life. To actively hasten death is wrong. We should allow death to occur naturally to a terminally ill person in its own time. Euthanasia is a great violation of the law of God, since it is a deliberate killing of a human person.
The legalization of euthanasia in an organized sense started in Leicester, England in 1935. The Voluntary Euthanasia Legalization Society, later called the Euthanasia Society, was founded by Dr. Charles Killick Millard. Around the world, after decades of trying and failing to legalize mercy killing, Australia was the first to succeed in its legalization. The continent, with already 3 times as many sheep than people, became the first country to introduce a voluntary euthanasia law. In 1995, in the Northern Territory of Australia, the Rights of the Terminally Ill Bill, proposed by Chief Minister Marshall Perrin, was passed by Parliament. The act passed 15-10, but was defeated a year later. But the deed was done, and this got the ball rolling for other countries around the world, as in the United States, assisted suicide is legal in Oregon, Washington, D.C., California, Colorado, Vermont, Maine, New Jersey, Hawaii, Washington, and Montana, although having a disputed status here. In other parts of the world, assisted suicide is also legal in Switzerland, Germany, and the Australian state of Victoria. And just last week, Spain approved a bill legalizing euthanasia.
If I have a message to other countries who would be tempted to open the door of euthanasia, I would say don't open the door because it is not controllable. The door is open, it will go more and more wide open.
They should.
The Supreme Court just legalized passive euthanasia in India, right? But what does that mean?
Wait, so what's the difference between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia? और ये living will का फंडा क्या है?
On 9th March, the Supreme Court upheld that passive euthanasia is legal and allowed the writing of a living will for the same. Passive euthanasia under special circumstances was already made legal in 2011. The court confirmed that the right to die with dignity is a fundamental right. And this has got a lot of people very interested in the entire debate surrounding euthanasia. So let's understand what these different terms mean and what they imply.
So now, can a person who wants to die just simply go ahead and do that legally?
No, it's not that easy. Euthanasia is when a terminally ill patient wants to end their life. And it's of 2 types, passive euthanasia and active euthanasia.
Wait, so what's the difference between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia?
Passive euthanasia is when you let a patient die, a patient who is on complete life support or in a vegetative state and cannot live without medical treatment. So you withdraw that medical support. And active euthanasia is when you actively end the life of a terminally ill patient.
So if I'm terminally ill, I can just decide that I want to die today?
No, that's not legal yet. That's active euthanasia. What you can do is that you can write a will which says that when you reach an irreversible stage where you're only alive because of medical support, the doctor can pull the plug and let you die.
Then what is living will? Where does that come from?
Living will is a document that a person writes in his normal state of mind, seeking passive euthanasia if he or she reaches an irreversible vegetative state in case of terminal illness. Therefore, this living will that the Supreme Court has sanctioned is for passive euthanasia.
In the context of the Supreme Court of India allowing passive euthanasia as legal, I would say that all that is legalized may not be morally right things to do. Let us be people who promote life, not the one who promote the culture of death.
We have lived sufficiently well and there is no further purpose in continuing to live. So instead of living further and creating trouble for others, it is better to live early. That is why I have written to the President to exercise his powers under the Constitution to grant mercy. He grants mercy to the people who are convicted for heinous offences by death penalty. So instead of exercising that power to kill people, he should kill us by exercising power, because the right to live also includes right to die.
Different old person or one suffering from an incurable disease or a person who is dying. Furthermore, no one is permitted to ask for this act of killing, either for oneself or for another person entrusted to his or her care, nor can he or she consent to it, either explicitly or implicitly, nor can any authority legitimately recommend or permit such an action. For it is the question of the violation of the divine law, an offense against the dignity of the human person, a crime against the life and an attack on humanity.
The person says it's my choice. Let me tell you something about it's my choice. Choices never affect just the individual. If I choose suicide, assisted or otherwise, it doesn't affect just Mark. It will affect my wife, my children, my grandchildren. It will affect my doctor, because I'll ask her to stop being my healer and become my killer.
The right to die is not part of the right to live under Article 21. The right to live with human dignity cannot be construed to include within its ambit the right to terminate natural life, says the Supreme Court. Today, it is very important to protect at the moment of death the dignity of the human person against a technological attitude that threatens to become an abuse. Thus, some people speak of the right to die, which is an expression that does not mean the right to procure death either by one's own hand or by the means of someone else as one pleases, but rather the right to die peacefully with human dignity.
I think the people don't see the impact of euthanasia on our society. The person asking in the name of autonomy for euthanasia, I would say it is a narrow-minded request. And what I would like to tell those people is that we can take care of you. We need to take care of you.
Dear friends, it's a very delicate decision to decide upon whether to pull the plug or allow the patient to remain on living in the case of irreversible diseases with the help of artificial methods. We need to take care of the sick person using proportionate means by studying the type of treatment to be used, its degree of complexity or risks, its costs and possibilities of using it, and comparing these elements with the result that can be expected, taking into account the state of the sick person and his or her physical and moral resources. We cannot make a bad decision just basing on the emotions of the moment. It calls for the exercise of prudence and wisdom. I would say that when a person becomes invalid and any number of expensive treatments wouldn't help him out to improve his life, it would be better to move that person to a palliative care and focus on giving comfort to the individual who is suffering without going for prolonging measures, trying to extend his life. It is good to focus on to make him or her comfortable in her last stages of life. When there is no expected hope of recovery, it is better to give such care in our own homes, as the patient would be much more comfortable to spend the last days along with his or her dear ones and die with a certain amount of dignity than being isolated and surrounded by machines and supports. It is necessary to state firmly once more that nothing and no one can in any way permit the killing of an innocent human being, whether a fetus or an embryo, an infant or an adult. An adult, the pleas of gravely ill people who sometimes ask for death are not to be understood as implying a true desire for dying, a true desire for euthanasia. In fact, it is almost and always a case of an anguished plea for help and love. What a sick person needs, besides medical care, it is love, the human and supernatural warmth with which the sick person can and ought to be surrounded by all those close to him or her, parents and children, doctors and nurses.
But euthanasia is like a false answer. It destroys everything. In families, people might disagree on it. Can you imagine how the family stays after and how to grieve after?
Those last few months may offer opportunities to heal a wound that may be decades old with a son or a father or a friend. It allows individuals to quietly and tenderly speak to the individual who is about to have their life end. It is a sacred time. That never involves killing.
We help people to die, controlling their suffering and controlling their symptoms. We don't help them to die by killing them.
What does true compassion mean? True compassion means that we journey with the other. We recognize that the other is my brother or my sister. The other is important to me because we share the common community. We share life together. The end result of this whole question is, do I love you enough to care for you when you are going through the most difficult time of your life? Because if I do, I'm going to somehow be able to say to you, you're important to me. I will be there with you.
Dear friends, let us banish the culture of death and be protectors of life.